The Blackhawk was already at 8,000 feet when they cut her harness. No warning, no explanation, just the crew chief's knife slicing through the straps that kept Staff Sergeant Nora King secured to the helicopter floor. She had exactly 3 seconds to understand what was happening before 2 sets of hands shoved her out the door into the Afghan night. No parachute, no rope, no chance. At least, that's what the 5 Delta Force operators watching from the cabin thought. They were about to learn why the 75th Ranger Regiment had kept Nora King's file classified for 7 years. But before I tell you how she survived what nobody survives, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Because what happened next rewrote everything they thought they knew about the limits of human survival. The morning had started with deceptive calm at Forward Operating Base Chapman. The Hindu Kush Mountains rose like broken teeth against a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Staff Sergeant Nora King sat apart from the others in the briefing room, cleaning her already spotless rifle with mechanical precision. 5 years in the Rangers had taught her that the quiet moments before a mission were when death liked to introduce himself. At 28, Nora didn't look like Hollywood's idea of an elite soldier. Average height, lean rather than bulky. With dark hair she kept shorter than regulation required, and brown eyes that never quite seemed to settle on any one thing. The kind of face that could disappear in a crowd, which had served her well in places where being remembered got you killed. "King," Major Harrison's voice cut through her thoughts. "You're sitting this one out." She looked up, hands still working the rifle's bolt. "Sir?" "Orders from up high. We're taking the Delta boys on this one. They need the flight hours, and Command wants them to get familiar with our AO." He gestured to the 5 operators sprawled across the briefing room's plastic chairs. "You're just riding along for the terrain familiarization. No ground ops." The Delta Force team looked like they'd been carved from the same block of granite, all sharp angles and barely contained violence. Their leader, Master Sergeant Cole "Hammer" Rourke, had the kind of scarred face that suggested he collected knife fights like some people collected stamps. "Copy that, sir," Nora replied, but something cold settled in her stomach. In 5 years of operations, she'd never been benched without reason. Specialist Danny Kim, her usual spotter, caught her eye from across the room. His expression said everything. Something's wrong. But before either could voice their concerns, the briefing began. "Operation Copper Valley," Harrison announced, pulling up a satellite image on the screen. ISR picked up a high-value target moving through the Korengal. Ahmad Rashidi, bomb maker, facilitator, and the bastard responsible for 3 of our KIAs last month. The room's energy shifted, sharpened. Nora knew 2 of those KIAs personally. Good men, blown apart by IEDs that bore Rashidi's signature, pressure plates hidden under trash, secondary devices placed exactly where first responders would step. "Delta takes point on the ground," Harrison continued. "Standard snatch and grab. King, you're in the bird for overwatch only. Questions?" Rourke leaned back in his chair. "Why do we need Ranger overwatch if we're not expecting contact?" "Insurance," Harrison replied. "King knows these mountains better than anyone. If things go sideways, she can guide you out." The briefing dissolved into tactical details. Approach vectors, contingency plans, extraction routes. Nora memorized it all, even though she supposedly wouldn't need it. That cold feeling in her stomach had grown into something with teeth. Kim found her at the armory as she loaded magazines. "This stinks," he said without preamble. "You've led 17 operations in the Korengal. Now, suddenly your taxi service?" "Orders are orders." She slipped another magazine into her vest, then another. If she was just observing, she shouldn't need more than basic combat load. She took double anyway. "Nora, something's—" "I know." She met his eyes. "Watch your 6 out here, Danny. Something feels off about everything today." The Blackhawk lifted off at 2300 hours, rotors beating the thin mountain air into submission. The Delta team sat in practiced silence, their night vision goggles making them look like prehistoric insects in the green-tinted darkness. Nora positioned herself near the door gunner, ostensibly to observe the terrain, but really because it gave her the best fields of fire if needed. 20 minutes into the flight, The intercom crackled. "Approaching phase line Alpha," the pilot announced. 3 minutes to target. That's when Rourke stood up. The movement was casual, like he was stretching, but Nora's hand drifted to her sidearm. In the green wash of her night vision, she saw him signal his team. Small gestures, nearly invisible, but she'd learned to read violence in all its languages. "King!" Rourke's voice came through her headset, conversational despite the rotor noise. "You know what your problem is?" She turned slightly, keeping her peripheral vision on the other Delta operators. "Enlighten me." "You're too good. Command's noticed. The Korengal belongs to you. Every warlord, every smuggler, every fighter knows the female ranger who walks their mountains like she was born in them." He moved closer, and now Nora could see the others shifting position, creating a box around her. That kind of reputation is bad for business. Whose business? The kind that pays better than army salary. His hand moved to his knife, not threatening, just resting there. Rashidi isn't just a bomb maker, he's a facilitator. Opium, weapons, information, he moves it all, and he's willing to pay handsomely to anyone who removes obstacles. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a mission, it was an execution. "How much?" she asked, buying time while her mind ran through options. 5 operators, confined space, 8,000 feet up. The math wasn't good. 50,000 each, plus future considerations. Rourke actually smiled. "Nothing personal, King. You're just too effective. The smuggling routes need to stay open, and you keep closing them." "So you throw me out of a helicopter and tell everyone it was an accident?" "Equipment malfunction. Happens all the time in these mountains. Harness fails, soldier falls, tragic accident, full military honors." He pulled the knife free, its blade black against the green night vision world. "Unless you want to make this difficult." Nora's mind processed a dozen scenarios in the space between heartbeats. She could fight, but 5-on-1 in a confined space would end badly. She could call for help, but the pilots might be in on it. The knife moved faster than thought, slicing through her harness straps with surgical precision. Before she could react, hands grabbed her arms, her vest, lifting and pushing in one coordinated motion. The Blackhawk's door yawned open beside her, 8,000 feet of nothing beyond its edge. "Should have stayed home, Ranger," Rourke said. Then they threw her out. The night swallowed her whole. Free fall at terminal velocity is approximately 120 miles per hour. At that speed, the human body becomes a projectile, subject to physics and nothing else. Most people would have spent their last seconds screaming, flailing, praying. Nora King did none of those things. Instead, she went to work. First priority, orientation. She spread her arms and legs into a stable arch position, using her body as an airfoil to control her descent. The mountains rushed up at her with terrifying speed. But panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had maybe 40 seconds before impact. Second priority, location. The green-tinted world through her night vision goggles showed the Korengal Valley, spread below like a 3-dimensional map. She knew these mountains intimately, every ridge, every valley, every seasonal stream. There, a glint of reflected moonlight, Korengal River running high with snowmelt. Third priority, angle. She shifted her body position, tracking toward the river. The water would be ice cold, barely above freezing, but it was better than rock. The angle had to be perfect. Too steep and the impact would be like hitting concrete. Too shallow and she'd skip across the surface, breaking every bone in her body. 20 seconds. She pulled her rifle tight against her chest, locked her ankles, and positioned her hands to protect her head. Below, the river looked like a silver thread. At this speed, it might as well be. 10 seconds. Nora had a sudden vivid memory of Ranger School, the combat water survival course. The instructor, a grizzled veteran named Martinez, demonstrating high-altitude water entry. The body can survive incredible impacts if you know how to distribute the force. It's not about being tough, it's about being smart. Physics doesn't care about your feelings. 5 seconds. She rotated her body, going from horizontal to nearly vertical, feet first, but angled forward at 45 degrees, toes pointed, muscles tensed but not rigid. The key was to penetrate the surface and let the water gradually slow her descent, not hit it like a wall. 2 seconds. Time dilated. The river filled her vision, no longer a thread but a rushing torrent of snowmelt and stone. She could see individual ripples, the way the current broke around submerged rocks. Too late to adjust, too late for anything but commitment. 1 second. She took the deepest breath of her life. Impact. The world exploded into chaos and pain. Even at the optimal angle, hitting water from 8,000 feet was like being beaten by invisible hammers. The shock traveled up through her feet, her legs, her spine, trying to compress her skeleton into itself. Her vision went white, then black, then white again. But she'd calculated correctly. Instead of shattering on impact, she penetrated the surface like a knife, the water gradually bleeding off her velocity as she plunged into the dark. The cold was beyond description, so intense it felt like burning, every nerve screaming in protest. Her lungs, compressed by the impact, screamed for air. But she was still moving too fast, still going deeper. The river was maybe 20 feet deep here, and she hit the bottom hard enough to crater into the silt. Rocks scraped against her vest, her helmet cracked against something solid, and her left shoulder erupted in pain that suggested dislocation at minimum. But she was alive. Nora pushed off the bottom with legs that barely responded, kicking toward what she hoped was the surface. The current had already carried her downstream, the water so cold it was stealing her strength with every second. Her gear, waterlogged and heavy, tried to drag her back down. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, sucking in air that tasted like life itself. The current slammed her into a boulder, adding broken ribs to her growing list of injuries, but the impact also pushed her toward the shallows. She clawed at rocks, fingernails breaking until she could drag herself partially onto a gravel bar. For 30 seconds she just lay there, coughing up river water and blood, every breath a symphony of pain. Her left shoulder was definitely dislocated, at least 2 ribs broken, and something in her right knee had torn during impact. But she was breathing. She was thinking. She was alive. Above, the Black Hawk's rotors were fading into the distance. They'd probably circle back to confirm the kill, but the river had carried her almost a quarter-mile downstream from the impact point. In the darkness, with the tree cover, they'd never spot her. Nora forced herself to her knees, then to her feet. Standing took 3 tries and left her vision graying at the edges, but adrenaline was a powerful drug. She needed to move. The temperature was dropping, her clothes were soaked, and hypothermia would kill her just as dead as the fall should have. She stumbled into the tree line, each step agony, and found a cluster of boulders that formed a natural shelter. With her good arm, she pulled out her emergency kit, waterproofed because she'd learned long ago that preparation meant assuming everything would go wrong. Fire starter, emergency blanket, basic medical supplies. She couldn't risk a fire. The smoke would give her away, but the emergency blanket would help retain what body heat she had left. The morphine injector called to her, promising relief from the symphony of pain playing through her body, but she couldn't afford the mental fog. Not yet. Instead, she gritted her teeth and relocated her shoulder. The sound it made going back into socket was wet and horrible, and she had to bite down on a rifle sling to keep from screaming. Next, she used her rifle sling to create a makeshift binding for her ribs. It wouldn't fix them, but it would keep her from puncturing a lung if she had to move fast. Her radio was destroyed, waterlogged and cracked from the impact. Her GPS beacon had survived, but activating it would broadcast her position to everyone, including the Delta team that had just tried to murder her. She was alone, injured, and presumed dead in hostile territory. Most people would have given up, waited for death or rescue. But Nora King wasn't most people. She was a ranger, and rangers don't quit. They also don't forget. As she huddled under the emergency blanket, feeling slowly returning to her extremities, Nora began to plan. Rourke and his team thought they had eliminated a problem. They were about to learn they'd created something much worse, a ranger with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Dawn came like a blessing and a curse. The sun's warmth was welcome after a night of bone-deep cold, but it also meant the hunt would begin. Rourke's team would need confirmation of her death, and when they didn't find a body, they'd come looking. Nora had moved twice during the night, ignoring her body's protests. Pain was just information, and information could be processed and filed away. She'd learned that in places where showing weakness got you killed faster than bullets. Her current position was a shallow cave, really just an overhang of rock, but it provided concealment and a good view of the valley below. Through her cracked but functional binoculars, she watched the Black Hawk return, circling the river like a vulture. It hovered near her impact point, and she could imagine the conversation inside. Confusion, concern, the growing realization that they hadn't found a body. The helicopter landed on a flat section of riverbank. 5 figures emerged, spreading out in a search pattern. Even from distance, she recognized Rourke's distinctive walk, predatory, confident. They were armed for war, not rescue, which told her everything about their intentions. Her rifle had survived the fall, protected by its case and her body. She'd field-stripped and cleaned it during the night, working by touch in the darkness. Now she settled into a shooting position, using a fallen log as support for her injured shoulder. The range was extreme, nearly 800 meters, and with her injuries she could maybe manage one good shot before the recoil became unbearable. But one shot could change everything. She watched them search, patient as stone. They were good, she'd give them that. Professional movement, overlapping fields of fire, textbook small unit tactics, but they were also arrogant, assuming they were hunting a corpse, not a survivor. One of them, Sergeant Briggs, she thought, stopped to drink from his canteen. A small thing, a human moment, but it meant he felt safe. That was their first mistake. Nora lined up the shot, adjusting for wind, elevation, and the slight tremor in her hands from the cold and pain. The math was automatic, carved into her muscle memory by thousands of hours on the range. Breathe in, breathe out, find the natural pause between heartbeats. She didn't shoot Briggs. That would have been expected, obvious. Instead, she put a round through Rourke's radio antenna, the high-powered rifle's report echoing across the valley like thunder. The antenna exploded in a shower of sparks and plastic, and 5 elite operators hit the dirt like their strings had been cut. The message was clear. I'm alive. I can reach you. And this is your only warning. For 10 seconds, nothing moved except the river. Then Rourke's voice carried across the valley, amplified by the mountain acoustics. "King! I know that's you." She didn't respond, just watched through her scope as they scrambled for better cover. They'd gone from hunters to hunted in the space of a trigger pull, and the psychology of that reversal was more devastating than any bullet. "We can work this out," Rourke called. "It was just business." Nora smiled grimly. Everything was just business until someone started shooting back. She displaced, moving through the pain to a new position. Rule 1 of sniper warfare: never fire twice from the same location. Her knee barely held her weight, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision, but she'd operated in worse condition. In Iraq, she'd completed a mission with a bullet in her hip. In Afghanistan's Paktika province, she'd walked 12 miles with a broken fibula. Pain was temporary. Death was permanent. The Delta team was moving now, trying to flank her suspected position. Good tactics, but they were making another assumption, that she was trying to escape. They didn't understand that she wasn't running. She was hunting. Nora had spent 5 years learning every trail, every cave, every hidden path in these mountains. The locals called her the Ghost Walker, the American woman who appeared and disappeared like morning mist. Those same trails that smugglers used to move opium, she now used to move herself, staying ahead of the Delta team's pursuit, but always visible enough to keep them following. She led them deeper into the valley, away from their helicopter, away from support. The pilot would be getting nervous, checking his fuel, wondering why his passengers hadn't returned. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to someone raising an alarm. At a narrow section of trail, she had left a surprise. Not an explosive, nothing that obvious, but a simple deadfall trap, the kind local hunters used. When Sergeant Cooper, bringing up the rear, hit the trigger, a log swung down from above. He dodged it, barely, but the movement sent him stumbling off the trail and down a steep slope. Not fatal, but his ankle snapped audibly when he hit the bottom. Now they were down to 4, and they had to carry their wounded. The math was getting worse for them with every passing hour. "King," Rourke's voice had lost its confident edge, "this doesn't end well for you. Even if you make it back, who's going to believe you? 5 decorated Delta operators against 1 Ranger with PTSD. You know how this plays out." He was right, of course. Her word against theirs, assuming any of them survived to give testimony. But Nora wasn't planning on a he said and she said resolution. She had something better in mind. Night fell again, and with it came the cold that turned breath into vapor and made fingers clumsy on triggers. The Delta team had made camp in a defensible position, good high ground, clear fields of fire, rock formations for cover, professional to the end. But they'd made one crucial error. They'd camped near water, a small stream that ran down from the higher elevations. Water meant noise, which covered movement, and it also meant predictable approach routes for anyone needing to drink. Nora waited until 0300, the dead time when even alert guards fought to keep their eyes open. She'd spent the day gathering what she needed, not weapons, but information. A salvaged radio from an old Taliban cache, damaged but functional enough to receive. Batteries from the same cache, and most importantly, a small digital recorder she always carried, the one that had survived the fall in its waterproof case. She couldn't transmit on the damaged radio, but she could listen, and what she heard confirmed her suspicions. Rourke's team was using an encrypted frequency, but encryption didn't matter when she could hear their side of the conversation. "Package is still active," Rourke was saying. "Request immediate extraction and QRF support." "Yes, sir, I understand the complications." "No, sir, we can't confirm elimination." "Copy, sanitize, and extract." Sanitize. Military speak for leaving no evidence, no witnesses. They weren't just going to kill her now. They were going to erase any trace that she'd ever been here. But Nora had one advantage they didn't know about. 3 nights ago, she'd cached supplies in these mountains, standard procedure for long-range reconnaissance, extra ammunition, medical supplies, and most importantly, a satellite phone with a fully charged battery. The cache was 2 kilometers away, past the Delta team's position. To reach it, she'd have to go through them, not around. Most people would have called that impossible. Nora called it Tuesday. She moved like water, like shadow, like the ghost the locals believed her to be. Every step calculated, every breath controlled. Her injuries screamed with each movement, but pain was just the body's opinion, and she didn't have to listen. The Delta team had set 2 guards, Briggs on the north side, Matthews on the south. Good positioning, overlapping fields of observation. But they were watching for someone trying to escape, not someone trying to infiltrate. Nora belly-crawled through their perimeter, so slow that motion sensors wouldn't register her movement, so quiet that even the mountain mice didn't flee. It took her an hour to cover 50 meters, but patience was a sniper's first virtue. She passed close enough to Briggs to hear his breathing, see the vapor from his exhales in the cold air. Her hand found a rock, perfectly sized, and she threw it into the darkness behind him. The sound was small but distinct, and his head snapped around, rifle tracking toward the noise. In that moment of distraction, she moved past him, flowing into the camp itself. Rourke and the others were sleeping, trusting their guards. She could have killed them all, slit throats, quick and quiet, but death would be too easy, too clean. She wanted them to face justice, to have their betrayal exposed. Instead, she found what she was looking for, Rourke's satellite phone, charging from a portable battery pack. She couldn't take it, they'd notice immediately, but she could use it. Her fingers flew across the keypad, sending a coded message to the one person she trusted absolutely. Kim would get the message when he woke. Coordinates, situation, request for backup. More importantly, he'd know to check the emergency cache where she was about to leave the digital recording of Rourke's conversations. Mission complete, She began her exfiltration, but as she moved past Rourke's sleeping form, his eyes opened. For a frozen moment they stared at each other in the darkness. His hand started moving toward his weapon. Nora's knife was faster, not a killing blow. She drove it through his hand, pinning it to the ground. His scream woke the camp, but she was already moving, vanishing into the darkness as lights blazed and voices shouted. "Find her!" Rourke roared, pulling the knife free with a sound that was part pain, part rage. "Find her now!" But finding a ghost in mountains that belonged to her was like catching smoke with bare hands. Nora reached her cache as dawn painted the peaks orange and gold. The satellite phone connected on the first try. "Danny," she said when Kim answered, his voice thick with sleep that instantly vanished when he heard hers. "I need you to listen very carefully. Record this call." She told him everything. The setup, the attempted murder, the confession she'd recorded. As she spoke, she could hear helicopters in the distance, multiple birds coming fast, either rescue or execution, depending on who arrived first. "Nora, stay put," Kim said. "Harrison's scrambling everyone. We're coming for you." "Negative. I'm finishing this." She pulled out her emergency flare gun, loaded a round. "Just make sure the recording gets to CID. Whatever happens next, I want the truth on record." The helicopters were closer now. She could see them, 2 Black Hawks and an Apache escort. But whose helicopters? She'd find out soon enough. Nora fired the flare straight up, a bright red star that hung in the morning sky like a challenge. "Here I am. Come and get me." The first Black Hawk banked sharply toward her position. Through her binoculars she could see the door gunner, weapon trained on her location. But behind him, she saw something that made her smile. Kim's face, and beside him, Major Harrison, looking like he wanted to kill someone. The second Black Hawk was heading for Rourke's position. She could imagine the conversation happening over the radio. Accusations, denials, demands for proof. But the proof was already uploaded to secure servers, Kim having worked his technical magic from the helicopter. The Apache circled overhead, a predator waiting to see which prey to strike. In the end, it would come down to evidence, testimony, and the kind of political maneuvering that happened far above her pay grade. But as the first Black Hawk settled onto the ridgeline and Kim jumped out, running toward her position, Nora knew she had already won the only victory that mattered. She'd survived. Against impossible odds, against betrayal in gravity and the cold mathematics of terminal velocity, she'd survived. "Jesus Christ, Nora," Kim said, taking in her injuries. The makeshift sling, the obvious concussion, the way she held herself to protect broken ribs. "How are you even standing?" "Rangers don't quit," she said simply. "We also don't die easy." Behind them, she could hear shouting from Rourke's position, the sounds of an arrest being made. The Delta team would face court-martial, conspiracy charges, attempted murder. Their careers were over, their reputations destroyed. But as the medics approached with a stretcher, Nora waved them off. "I'll walk," she said, even though each step sent lightning through her body. "I jumped out of a helicopter at 8,000 feet. I can make it to the bird." Harrison fell into step beside her, his expression unreadable. "King, what you did, surviving that fall, it's impossible." "No, sir," she replied, wincing as her knee tried to buckle. "It's just highly improbable. There's a difference." "The physics alone." "Physics is just math, sir, and I've always been good at math." She paused at the helicopter's door, looking back at the mountains that had almost become her grave. "Besides, Rangers don't need parachutes. We just need the will to survive and the knowledge of how to fall." As the Black Hawk lifted off, carrying her toward medical treatment and the inevitable investigation, Nora allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. Rourke and his team had thrown her from a helicopter, expecting her to die screaming in the dark. Instead, she'd turned their murder attempt into their confession, their trap into their prison. The recorder in her pocket contained everything: their admission of guilt, their connection to the smuggling networks, their willingness to kill a fellow American soldier for money. Combined with the physical evidence and Kim's technical surveillance, it would be more than enough for conviction. 3 weeks later, Nora stood in the same briefing room where it had all started. Her shoulder was still healing, her ribs still tender, but she was back in uniform. The investigation had been thorough, the evidence overwhelming. Rourke and his team were facing life in military prison. Staff Sergeant King, General Morrison, commander of JSOC, addressed her from the podium. "What you survived defies explanation. The fall alone should have killed you. The injuries should have incapacitated you. The pursuit should have ended you. Yet, here you stand." "Rangers lead the way, sir," she replied, the motto carrying new weight after everything. "Indeed they do." He held up a folder. "Which is why I'm offering you a choice. Full medical retirement with honors or a new assignment. There's a unit that could use someone with your particular combination of skills and sheer refusal to die." "What kind of unit, sir?" Morrison smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say that." "Report to Fort Bragg, Building 9. Someone will meet you there." As Nora left the briefing room, Kim caught up with her in the hallway. "So? Medical retirement or mystery assignment? What do you think?" He laughed. "I think they threw you out of a helicopter and you turned it into a promotion. I think you're physically incapable of taking the easy path." "The easy path is boring," Nora replied, then winced as her ribs reminded her that the hard path had costs. "Besides, someone needs to keep proving that Rangers don't need parachutes." "That's not actually true, you know. The fall could have killed you. Should have killed you." Nora stopped walking, turned to face him. "Danny, they threw me out of a helicopter at 8,000 feet because I was too good at my job. They betrayed everything we stand for out of greed. The fall didn't kill me because I refused to let their betrayal be the end of my story." She continued down the hallway, each step still painful, but getting stronger. "Rangers don't quit, Danny. We don't quit when we're tired. We don't quit when we're hurt. And we sure as hell don't quit when someone throws us out of a helicopter." "So what do we do?" Nora smiled, the expression sharp as a blade. "We survive. We adapt. We overcome. And then we make them regret ever thinking we were just another problem to be eliminated." Behind them, the sun set over Fort Bragg, painting the sky the color of blood and gold. Somewhere in military prison, 5 former Delta Force operators were learning that betraying a Ranger wasn't just a mistake. It was a physics lesson in how far someone could fall and still come back stronger. And somewhere in Building 9, a new kind of unit was about to gain its most unconventional operator, a woman who'd fallen 8,000 feet without a parachute and lived to tell about it. The video ends with actual footage from Nora's helmet cam, recovered during the investigation. The moment of the push, the fall, the impact, all captured in grainy, nightmarish detail. The investigation board had watched it dozens of times, trying to understand how she'd survived. The answer was simple and complex at the same time: training, preparation, and the absolute refusal to accept death as an outcome. She'd calculated angles in free fall, used her body as an airfoil, found the one possible survival solution in 1,000 fatal alternatives. But more than that, she'd proven something that every Ranger knows but few truly test: that the human will, properly focused and trained, can overcome impossible odds. That sometimes the difference between death and survival isn't equipment or luck, but the simple refusal to stop fighting. Nora King became a legend in the special operations community, not for what she'd done on missions, though her record was exemplary, but for being the Ranger who got thrown from a helicopter at 8,000 feet and not only survived, but came back to destroy the men who'd tried to kill her. They'd thought they were eliminating a problem. Instead, they'd created a legend. And legends, as any soldier will tell you, are much harder to kill than people. Rangers lead the way. Sometimes that way is straight down at terminal velocity. But as Nora King proved on a cold night in the Korengal Valley, Rangers don't need parachutes. They just need the will to survive and the knowledge that falling isn't the same as failing. The only difference is whether you get back up. And Rangers always get back up. Have you ever faced a situation where everyone expected you to fail, only to prove that survival is more about mindset than circumstance? What would you do if betrayed by the very people meant to protect you? Could you find the will to survive an 8,000-foot fall without a parachute? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story reminded you that the human spirit is harder to kill than the human body, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of impossible survival and unbreakable will. Share this with someone who needs to remember that falling isn't the same as failing. It's just another opportunity to prove how strong you really are. More stories of warriors who refuse to die are waiting on your screen. Watch those next, and remember, Rangers lead the way, even when that way is straight down. Until tomorrow, remember, they can throw you from a helicopter, but they can't throw the Ranger out of you. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this one.